What is going on, everybody? How you all doing out there? I hope this video is finding you well. Welcome back to Get Right On In. My name is Andrew, for those of you who do not know, and today I am just going to be talking about one of my favorite book series out there, The Dark Tower. One of my booktube besties, Lezlie, over at The Nerdy Narrative, is reading this series for the first time, and I am having so much fun watching her Discord server, joining in with her, and sharing all of their thoughts for the first time. My boys over at the CodeX Cantina are about to finish this series for the first time as well, and I'm really excited about that. So I thought I would just come out here and put in my 2 cents on what I thought of this series and whether or not you should read it, even though I've already claimed it as one of my favorites. So with all that out of the way now, without further ado, let's get right on in. So I should probably be honest and say that I struggled with the first book in this series called The Gunslinger the first 3 times that I tried to read it. I don't know what it was, I just couldn't really get into it. It's kind of confusing at first, and a lot of times when people do look up this series, they see a lot of people who say you've just got to make it through The Gunslinger, and as soon as you get to the second book, The Drawing of the Three, things just really take off. And now that I have read the series twice over and am currently listening to it on the audiobook, I have a little bit of thoughts on that because I used to be the kind of person to tell people to just skip The Gunslinger completely because there's an argument at the beginning of The Drawing of the Three that basically goes over everything that happened in The Gunslinger in the first place. But the audiobook has really changed my perspective on that, just because something about hearing the story being told to me just made it a little bit different than it was when I was trying to connect with it on myself. Because even when I was reading the series for the second time, I just did not connect that well with The Gunslinger. But I'm very happy that I did decide to push forward with this because I had started reading some other Stephen King books, and the more I got into his work and the more I became a constant reader, the more I just saw other Stephen King fans talking about how this series was his magnum opus, talking about how The Gunslinger was a little bit rough, but really that was it. And so I dove back in, I finished the book, and I seriously, like, once Drawing of the Three hits, oh my gosh, this story just takes on a ride. It is unlike any other series I feel like I have ever read in my entire life, because each book is so different from the other one, and it really is hard to even put this series into an overall genre. Like, I think a lot of people put it into fantasy just because it is kind of a fantasy series, but it being from Stephen King as well also does have some of those Stephen King horror elements in it. But there's also like science fiction-y elements, and there's all sorts of stuff just going on in this series, and it's like every page is an adventure. And I was just recently watching one of Leslie's videos on her time in the Dark Tower and how she's feeling about it, and I totally agree with what she's saying about how it just doesn't make sense how someone's brain can work the way that his brain works. This story is so masterfully crafted that I can't think of anything else I'd rather recommend for people to read when it came to Stephen King. Even if they have never read any of his other books, I definitely feel like this is a series that anyone who loves any type of those books in any of those genres would really find something to latch onto in this series and let it take them on a ride. I think that I'm fortunate in the fact that I was able to read this series from start to finish without actually having to stop in between books, because there was a time in life when Stephen King was hit by a car and his health was kind of questionable, and some people didn't even know if he would ever be able to finish this series. And at that time he had only gotten up to book 4, which now, you know, on the retrospect for me, I really think about like, oh my gosh, if that was just the end of the series, I would have been sad as well. But I am happy that he came back and finished it, because for me, by the time I got to the 3rd book, I was really like, the only thing that I'm scared of from here is that the rest of the series is not going to live up to the height that books 2 and 3 took it to. I was checking these books out from the library when I first was reading them, so when I got to the 3rd book, I told myself, if this series ends as well as it's building right now, then I am going to go buy the box set immediately. And I own the box set now for sure. It's in storage right now, which is why I'm not holding up all of the different books as it is, but everything about this series just took me on a ride, and it was the first series that I personally have read in a binge form like that. Even if a series has a few books out, and even if I'm really into the first book or even get into the second book, I really usually cherish my series a little bit more, like take a little bit longer, really let it marinate, but I could not stop reading these books at all. And when I first read them, it was when I was working 6 days a week bartending. I never had time for anything, but every spare moment I had was spent inside of Midworld with these characters, this little quartet, this wonderful stuff, and it's just like the most mind-blowing thing that I really feel like I've ever read. If you are out there and you know that there are a lot of other books in the Stephen King universe that tie into this one, I would say not to stress out that much about that, because you really don't have to read any of the other books in order to understand the Dark Tower, and in vice versa as well. Like, I don't think that you really need to read the Dark Tower to understand the other books as well, but I haven't finished every single tie-in. The only one, I read the book Insomnia before I had ever read the Dark Tower series, and Insomnia was one of the first Stephen King books that I read in general. I would like to go back and read that book now that I have read the Dark Tower, because there was a lot of confusing things for me in that book that I just think would make a lot more sense. But if you are interested in reading any other tie-in book, I would say the only one that you should put any focus on really would be Salem's Lot and maybe The Stand. But Salem's Lot, I think, as far as some characterization goes, has the most direct correlation with the Dark Tower series in the later half of the series. But apart from that, I would just say go into that series with an open mind. If you struggle with the Gunslinger, just keep pushing through, because really it is Stephen King at his finest. And even if you haven't read Stephen King and you're looking for a place to start with Stephen King, I don't think that this would be a bad place for you to start at all, even though it might be a little bit difficult, as I've said a few times now, to get through the Gunslinger, especially if you aren't used to Stephen King's writing style. But these are some page-turning novels, and not in the kind of way where you're gonna be scared, but you will be leaving the lights on all night just so you can finish, because you're gonna want to know what is next and know what is coming, because every single page, I swear, it's just such a journey. So let me know down in those comments if you have read this series, or if you are interested in reading this series, or if you have any questions or want me to do any videos on this series. I'm trying to keep this pretty spoiler free and just keep it straight to the point to say, like, I really think that you should take the time to read this series if you love any fantasy books or horror books or thriller books or science fiction books or anything like that, because this is really one of my favorite series of all time, and I didn't know it was gonna be that when I read it. So I am very excited about listening to it on audiobook now for my third go around in this series, and I cannot wait until I read it again once I'm done, because this is a series that I will be reading over and over and over again for the rest of my life. So let me know what you think down in those comments, and while you're down there, if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you considered giving it a little thumbs up, as well as potentially considered pressing on that little subscribe button to join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sometimes on Sundays for bookish and writerly and entertainment-y-esque content just like this. In the meantime, I hope you all have a day just as beautiful as you, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!